Hello and welcome to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 5 Countdown video. Today we'll be taking a second look at the current Top 5 compositions for patch 11.23. That's right folks, we're doing a run back to see which builds are at the top of the meta. The reason for this is due to a longer than usual patch. 11.23 has had a lot of time to fully develop, especially since players needed a bit of time to figure out the mid-patch, which came out a few days after the release of 11.23 that shook up the meta. With that said, let's get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. To start off our top 5, we have Reroll Compositions coming in at number 5. Basically, we're lumping all of the non-Katarina reroll comps into one spot. The reason for that is, on average, they all perform about the same. Capable of top 4ing, maybe getting a second, but rarely ever getting first. There's a multitude of factors that go into how well these reroll builds perform, but the gist of it is that they just aren't quite as strong as Katarina and the other compositions in our top 5. As for which reroll compositions we're going to talk about, the big three are Warwick, Kog'Maw, and Trundle. Each of these reroll builds has their own requirements to do well, but the idea behind each of them is similar. Pick one of the main carries, reroll to 3-star 2 or 3 of the core champions, and earn some LP. First off, Warwick. Warwick is generally rerolled alongside Quinn and Lissandra, with Challenger and Chemtech champions rounding out the rest of the composition. Warwick can be quite good as the main carry as long as he has a Rage Blade. Chemtech adds a layer of survivability which allows Warwick to pop off and scale during the round. What Warwick does best in particular is shredding frontline units because his passive does damage based on the enemy unit's health. The best time to play this version is when you've hit a few early Warwicks and Quinns, since they are the key to doing well with the comp. Items also play a large part in the success of Warwick reroll, so don't commit unless you're guaranteed to have a Rage Blade and probably Quicksilver, since early CC is the Wolf's Bane for Warwick. Passive augments also help a lot, such as Featherweight, that adds bonus stats to Warwick. Kog'Maw is similar to Warwick, as Kog'Maw's strength is also being able to shred beefy frontliners with his ability. Mutations also aid Kog'Maw, such as Voidborn or Hyper-Adrenaline Glands, both of which adds a bit more to his auto attacks. In addition to Kog'Maw, it's common to 3-star Garen, Kassadin, Graves, and Caitlyn. Not all of these need to be 3-starred, but this composition is usually rolled 4 on level 5, so it's not improbable to hit multiple 3-star 1 costs. Garen is essential as he locks down the front line, while Kog'Maw pew-pews from the back. Another important detail is items for both Garen and Kog'Maw. Garen needs Bloodthirster to sustain between ability casts, and Kog'Maw needs a Rage Blade to ramp up. So the indicators for the reroll composition are an opening board with several of the champions, components to make items for both Garen and Kog'Maw, and ideally a good mutation for Kog'Maw to help him scale into the late game. And finally, there's Trundle, who abuses the fact that Trundle 3 with Bloodthirster is insanely good. Buy 3 is also important as she packs quite the punch and reduces the armor of enemy champions, allowing Trundle to do additional damage. This is definitely the simplest reroll composition, as all you need to care about is Trundle and Vi 3, along with obtaining Bloodthirster for Trundle. All in all, these reroll compositions can go toe-to-toe with any of the top meta comps, but there's a lot of variance. What items you have, how quickly you hit your 3-star units, what the rest of the lobby is doing, and more determine how effective a player can be. The bonus to playing non-Katarina reroll comps is that you're unlikely to be contested and other players are likely to be rerolling, meaning hitting your units should be easier. Let's continue to the next composition that comes in at number 4, Challenger. Challenger is the natural progression from the old Yone Academy days of yesteryear, and by yesteryear we mean just one patch ago. With Academy being overall weaker than it was, that meant in order for Yone to shine, there needed to be a new way to run him. And Challengers are great at running since, they dash at enemies when they get a takedown. Much like Academy Yone, Challenger Yone is a super simple comp to run. Find Yone and throw in 6 to 8 Challengers, and you're good to go. With so much inherent attack speed, in addition to the stimmy they get after a takedown, Challenger boards can burn through the enemy really fast. This is great against any composition that needs time to ramp up, like Arcanists, or boards that rely on delaying the fight, like Innovators. Even against Katarina, Yone Challenger can do well, but once the Katarina player hits all of their 3-star units, the favor shifts towards them, and Yone will struggle to survive against the assassins. As for items, they're roughly the same as before, with Runins being essential. Guardian Angel is also quite good on Yone because he can still deal damage with his clone while resurrecting, plus this comp lacks utility to keep Yone alive, so the revive is actually very good. Generally, the third item is going to be Last Whisper, since a lot of frontlines are either armor heavy or run Bramble Vest, and getting through those units as fast as possible is the key to winning rounds with a Challenger board. Fiora, Kaisa, and Samira can all be secondary item carries, or you can go for utility with Zeke's, Banshees, or Shroud. All that really matters is hitting level 7, finding Yone, and having items for him. From there, you just need challenger units to toss in and 2-star them, and you're set for the rest of the game. Keep in mind that Yone Challenger is mostly a mid to early late game composition, as it does have scaling issues. It's really good for getting into the top 4, but can struggle after that, though Yone 3 can be a potential win condition. So don't expect to run over the opposition to the finish line, and instead aim for a consistent 4th or 3rd place finish. Up next, we have another easy to run composition coming in at number 3, Arcanists. Arcanist, like Challenger, is simple because it relies mainly on 6 or 8 Arcanists, and that's about it. There are other synergies that can be used, of course, such as Enchanter, Socialite, or even Mutant, but the bulk of the board will be full of Arcanist champions. The biggest difference between Arcanist and Challenger, besides being AP, is that there's a decent amount of flexibility in which carry you can play. Whereas Challenger is all about Yone, Arcanist can be Lux, Victor, or even Malzahar as a carry. Malzahar is better when the mutation of the game is Synaptic Web, but on average he can do well when 3-starred regardless of the mutation that game. Lux is the bread and butter standard carry and is the most likely champion players will use. Victor has a higher cap than the other 2 carries, but being a 5 cost, it is difficult to 2-star him consistently, especially with the pace of the game being quite fast. Another key champion for Arcanists is Vex. Vex with defensive items is extremely good as a solo frontliner, especially if you have the Runic Shield augment or even Exiles. This is because the shield Vex gains from her ability scales incredibly well with the Arcanist trait, meaning she can stall out the enemy quite a long time. At least usually long enough for Lux to cast a few times or Victor to get one big cast off. Another bonus for this composition is that items per carry are fairly interchangeable. Ideally, you want blue buff on Lux or Malzahar, but Shojin works just fine, which can be given to Victor as well. Then really, any AP items are fine, such as Jeweled Gauntlet, Deathcap, Archangels, and even Gunblade. Just make sure you're getting defensive items for Vex, as that is the key to doing well with this board. In general, Arcanists will do really well against the majority of the meta comps. They will often struggle against Innovators because that board runs quite a few Enchanters as well as healing, but it's also heavily dependent on what champions each board is running. With good position, Arcanist can also do well into Katarina during the mid game. Unfortunately, once Katarina and Talon 3 are found, Arcanist will struggle to keep up, making it a difficult board to win games with. Coming in at number 2, we have Innovator. Innovators have consistently been one of the better opening boards for set 6 since the PvE, especially since it pairs so well with Scrap. But the Innovator summon had issues scaling well. This is no longer an issue because the dragon, being scaly, has improved in the scaling department. Plus, the 5 Innovators Bear summon is useful for adding extra stats to your board. The general goal with Innovators is to stall, and stall some more. This is done with a lot of shields, healing, and a tad bit of CC. To accomplish this, you will need Seraphine, meaning Socialite is now active, which leads to adding Taric, and then Oriana for Enchanter, which pairs with Zillion for Clockwork, and, well, you can see how this composition just naturally synergizes with itself. Jace also brings a lot to the late game for Innovators, particularly with defensive items in the front line, since this board can really lack in that area. Overall, Innovators have the highest cap of any top composition because 7 Innovators is difficult to hit, and Jace 2 is a requirement. Even without those things, a 5 Innovator board with Enchanters can do just fine. But if you want to win with Innovators, then yes, Jace 2 and 7 Innovator trait is necessary. What is quite nice about playing Innovators is that they do really well against Arcanists and Katarina. It's not always a guaranteed win, but having magic resist from Enchanter and a lot of extra shields and healing go a long way in stalling out the fight against other comps. And while winning with Innovators isn't always guaranteed, if you have a good opener with Innovator and Scrap, then you can generally comfortably reach the top 4, even if you end up pivoting out. And the final composition for patch 11.23 that is completely surprising and no one saw coming in at number 1 is Katarina. Wow, what a shocker. Katarina at number 1. Which is quite funny considering they did nerf this composition just a few days after the release of 11.23. Despite those nerfs, this composition has taken over the meta. It's not quite Katarina weak, but it's certainly influencing the meta heavily and is a big reason as to why the pace of the game is so fast. Look, we all know this composition by now. Open Fort, hit level 6, reroll for Katarina, Talon, Echo, Shaco, Blitzcrank, and Leona. Hit Katarina and Talon 3, win the game. Well, not quite win the game, but at least top 4 consistently. Obviously, there's more to it than this, but this build has been on the radar for most of 11.23, so we don't really need to discuss how good it is much more than we already have. If you're willing to contest a reroll comp and don't mind the somewhat specific playstyle required to play it, then Katarina is the composition for you. Just keep in mind that despite how strong it is not a guaranteed win. It's just the best all-around composition to climb the ladder with due to its consistency. That's it for our second look at the top 5 meta comps for patch 11.23. But before we go, we have a few honorable mentions to talk about. One of those honorable mentions is Yordles. Yordles keep sticking around as this somewhat fringe meta composition that can do well, but is never consistent enough to be in the top 5. The main reason Yordles are even on the radar is due to Vex, as Vex is one of the best champions in the current meta. Heimerdinger and Tristana are okay carries, but nothing amazing. Mainly, we recommend not committing to fully 3-starring every Yordle because, let's be honest, the Yordle Lord is a joke. Stick to aiming for Vex 3 and a carry and use the Yordle trait to earn some extra gold. The other honorable mention for patch 11.23 is Mutant. We briefly mentioned this earlier with Arcanist, but Mutant can be decent on its own when paired with Chemtech. There are a lot of good champions with Mutant Chemtech such as Mundo, Malzahar, and Kog'Maw, with Victor and Kai'Sa as late game units. Mutations and augments definitely play a huge role in how well this synergy does, but there's enough flexibility that most games you can squeeze into the top 4 when playing some variation of Mutant Chemtech. That's all for today's video, folks. At the end of the day, despite Katarina and rerolling being such a prominent aspect of the meta, there's actually a decent amount of compositions to choose from. That said, if you want to climb, stick to 1 or 2 comps with Katarina in your back pocket to pull out occasionally. Chances are you will climb a good amount on the ladder for the remainder of patch 11.23. Let us know in the comment section below which composition you've been having the most success with that isn't Katarina. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.